baseball and basketball team. In 2013, he was inducted into the Arkansas Military Veterans Hall of Fame, where we are pleased to introduce you to the Veteran of the Hour, Vess Lawbaugh.
I'm going to start out today by telling you about a real hero. And then we'll switch after that and talk about Vietnam in general, and I will give you an opportunity to ask a few questions. The hero that I'm talking about is a man named Don Cook, captain in the U.S. Marine Corps. I first met Don Cook when we were in basic school together as second lieutenants, and then we attended two other schools, communication officer school, and later on security school together. Don Cook was from Vermont. He played football for St. Michael's College. He was married and had 4 children. Last time I saw Don Cook was on Okinawa in 1964, before any combat troops were in Vietnam. Don was scheduled to go down for 30 days to Vietnam. They were sending various Marine officers down at that time to become acquainted with what we expected to get into in 1965. The day before he left, Jack Posa, another captain, and I, and Don went to a place called White Beach on Okinawa and spent the afternoon at the beach. We shook hands, and Don went to Vietnam. He went down, as I said, for only 30 days. He was with a Vietnamese, South Vietnamese Army unit that was on a rescue mission. While on that mission, he was shot in the knee and was left to be captured. Don never fired a shot at the enemy. He never led troops in a battle. And yet, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, what used to be called the Congressional Medal of Honor, just now the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award, in the 1970s. This was 1964. A couple of days after Christmas is when he was wounded and when he was captured by the Viet Cong. The first few days, they went from camp to camp on their way to North Vietnam. Don attempted to escape, but it's kind of hard to escape when you only have one leg that's working. And he was quickly recaptured. Twice more he tried to escape before they got into North Vietnam. Both times he was recaptured very quickly. He ended up in a place that was called the Hanoi Hilton, which was the same place that John McCain and others went later on. Don was among the first prisoners. In fact, he was the first Marine to be taken as a prisoner of war during Vietnam. When he got there, the first thing he tried to do was escape again, and he was caught. But then he realized one thing. that he was going to get caught every time that he tried to escape. And so what he did at first was organize escapes with other prisoners. They would go in one direction, he would go in another, he'd get caught and be brought back, and a few of them actually managed to escape from North Vietnam because of that little tactic. Don would not cooperate with the Viet Cong in any way. He wouldn't sign anything, he wouldn't give them any information. All he would give them was his name, rank, and service number. That irritated him very much, and he received very many beatings because he would not cooperate in any way. I mentioned before that he was a captain. There were senior officers that were also in the Hanoi Hilton. Incidentally, that's not a hotel, it's a prison. He was at a lower rank than many people that were in there, but no one was taking any leadership role, and he actually became the leader of the prisoners that were interred. Don is the person that developed the code that prisoners used. It was a tapping code where they would tap on walls and they could communicate with each other. And as I said, he attempted more escapes, and this went on for about 2.5 years. Many of the prisoners were ill. There was an epidemic that took place in 1967 when he had been there almost 3 years. Don gave up his medication to other prisoners, even though he was ill himself. He nursed them, took care of them, and in December of 1967, almost 3 years from the time he was captured, he passed away. All this time, no one knew where he was, since he didn't cooperate and wouldn't give any information. And his wife and 4 children were waiting for them until the 1970s, when the other prisoners of war were released. Immediately when they were released, all of them started praising what he did as a prisoner of war, the bravery that he showed, etc. I'll read the citation in just a moment, but what they passed on and what they all attested to caused the Marine Corps, Department of the Navy, and the President of the United States to award him the Medal of Honor. This is how the citation reads. Donald Gilbert Cook, United States Marine Corps, prisoner of war by the Viet Cong in the Republic of Vietnam since 31 December 1964 to 8 December 1967. For conspicuous gallantry at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while interned as a prisoner of war by the Viet Cong in the Republic of Vietnam, despite the fact that by doing he would bring about harsher treatment for himself, Captain Cook established himself as the senior prisoner, even though in actuality he was not. He repeatedly assumed more than his share. Cook willingly and unselfishly put the interests of his comrades before that of his own well-being and eventually his life. Giving more needy men his medicine and drug allowance while constantly nursing them, he risked infection from contagious diseases while in a rapidly deteriorating state of health. This unselfish and exemplary conduct, coupled with his refusal to stray even the slightest from the code of conduct, earned him the deepest respect from not only his fellow prisoners, but his captors as well. Rather than negotiate for his own release or better treatment, he steadfastly frustrated attempts by the Viet Cong to break his spirit. And he passed the same resolve on to the men whose well-being he so closely associated himself. Knowing his refusals would prevent his release prior to the end of the war, and also knowing his chances for prolonged survival would be small in event of continued refusal, he chose nevertheless to adhere to a code of conduct far and above that which could be expected. His personal valor and exceptional spirit of loyalty in the face of almost certain death reflected the highest credit upon Captain Cook, the Marine Corps, and the United States Naval Service. Don Cook was the first Marine to ever receive a Medal of Honor while a prisoner of war. That, young men and women, is what a true hero is. I went to Vietnam for the first time in 1965, about 6 months after he was captured. We went down the 3rd Marine Division, which I served with, and one of the Army Airborne Battalions were the first combat troops in Vietnam. When we went down, both organizations were much different than they were towards the end of the war. This was the beginning of actual combat in Vietnam. Our morale was high. We'd all trained together. We knew each other. And we were there to accomplish a mission. That mission, as stated to us, was to put an end to what was called the domino theory. That means if Vietnam fell, the rest of Southeast Asia would fall like dominoes. That was not a bad tour in Vietnam because, as I said, we had some discipline and we knew each other, and we were well trained when we went down. We thought we were going to be successful. We didn't think the war would last very long until some rules were set up one of them being that we could not cross the demilitarized zone. Viet Cong, North Vietnamese could come down and fire at us. We could fire at them, but we could not cross a line into North Vietnam. The reason for this was given to us later on was that they didn't want China to enter the war like it did several years before in Korea. That was one of the things that caused us some problems. Another thing that caused us problems was firing restrictions that we had. Early in the summer, a platoon from the 9th Marines was ambushed, and about 15 of them were killed and several were wounded. We retaliated. We retaliated like we had seen in the movies about World War II and the stories we'd heard about World War II. we fired artillery where the enemy had been. We had airstrikes go down. The village in which they were in was completely destroyed. Within a couple of days, we were visited by a man named General Key, who dragged General Westmoreland, commander of American forces, up to Da Nang to tell Marines they were not going to fight a war that way. From then on, I was with an artillery unit, 2nd Battalion, 12th Marines. I was a forward observer. I'd been retrained as a forward observer at that time. The rules that they established were this: that we would not have a battery, which was our smallest unit of artillery, fire at the enemy without getting permission from battalion. The battalion would not fire without getting permission from the regiment. The regiment would not fire without getting permission from 3rd MAF, and 3rd MAF would not get permission, would not fire without permission from the South Vietnamese. All right. Instead of a fire mission taking 5 minutes, the fire mission then would take 15 or 20 minutes. By that time, if you had a target, the enemy would no longer be there. I remember one time that we called a fire mission in from a place called the Marble Mountains, south of Da Nang. We had enemy in sight. We called in a fire mission, and we sat, and we sat, and we sat. And finally, we just took rifles. At that time, we had decent rifles, the M14, and fired at the enemy with rifles. Of course, that wasn't as effective as artillery. So anyway, we were handicapped by rules. Things that did go fine for us is that we had very few disciplinary problems. There was very little drinking. Only one incident of drugs that I remember. Our people were there to fight a war, and they were doing it properly in 1965 when we first went down. I came back from that tour. It was called back in early 1969. I was appalled at the way things had deteriorated in 4 years. First of all, things weren't going very well for us back in the U.S. We weren't being, news media were playing up things like there was a man named Kelly that massacred some Vietnamese. There were reports of Americans killing babies. I never saw any babies killed. The villages being burned. I never saw any villages burned. But there were some undisciplined units down there that apparently there were some incidents that were played up in the news, and people were calling us baby killers when we came back. The drug problems were very serious. The discipline was poor. We had such things, something called fragging, where if a person didn't like his superior officer or NCO, they just roll a grenade in the tent. Drinking was very prevalent. And the Vietnamese themselves were not the same as they were before. It was Da Nang went from a quaint village to a dirty town. Just trash all over the place. I almost felt lucky when I was wounded. I was wounded on 12 August 1969, was medevaced, spent 130 hospital. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to come back to the U.S. because I didn't feel welcome here. I felt that I left comrades behind that I cared about, and so I volunteered to go back to Vietnam and went back with a cane and spent the rest of my tour in Vietnam before I eventually came home. But as I said, it was two different times, and it seemed like two different wars. One of them I was proud of. The other I was disgusted with. Do you have any questions? Any questions about Don Cook? Any questions about what Vietnam was really like? Yes, sir. You'll have to speak a little louder, please. Pardon me? Full Metal Jacket was a good picture of Vietnam in 1968. I'm going to have to come down and listen to you down there. I will do that. I'll slip down. I'll give you the mic.
Okay, the sergeant, senior sailing director, Sergeant Robert Lee Aroney, was your senior sailing director the same way, or was he more, let's say, tolerant?
Gentler.
Seriously. Okay, would you say that senior sailing directors today are more effective than past?
I would say that drill instructors today are more effective because they, first of all, they have the commandant looking down their necks. Secondly, they realize that what was done by that drill instructor was not a productive way to train troops. In fact, he caused one to commit suicide. But even language is looked at now as, we'll say, unproductive as far as boot camp is concerned. They're more concerned with training troops than harassing troops. I have one grandson that is a warrant officer in the Marine Corps right now, and one that lives here in Springdale that just got out, spent time in Iraq and in Norway, and they both tell me that their drill instructors were more concerned with their learning military skills than they were with being browbeaten. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I answered it
Okay.
perfectly, actually.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks. Thank you.
At this time, we would like to thank our Veteran of the Hour for sharing their stories with us. We are honored to have you today.
In the Marine Corps.
Okay.
I like to thank you.
And presenting a
You're quite
special
welcome.
thank you is our very own Mr. Gladden from Har-Ber High School. Just walk up to him. Good night.
On behalf of Har-Ber High School, we'd like to thank you for your service and for sharing with us today. So, a little plaque and token of our appreciation. So, thank you, sir. Thank you.
And now, Braden Sandra will be performing taps. You know, he's playing taps.
People sitting up front, they have to go up through the top left. Okay.
Let's give a round of applause for all the veterans here today. On behalf of the Har-Ber East program, we would like to thank you all for attending today.
Hey, students, if you guys are sitting up on the top, please go through the top left door. And then students down here, please go through there.